It's a couple things before we get started. It's really, I always enjoy coming here because it's hard to believe that I'm standing in the same place that guys like Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, Murray Rothbard, Pete Boettke, who's one of our favorites, the giants of the Austrian school from the latter part of last century and the middle part of last century, Israel Kirzner, Larry White, all these guys have been here and talked probably at this same lectern. And it's humbling to be in the company with those guys. And when you look, I spend more time looking. If you see me looking like wandering aimlessly, I'm looking at the library and the books and wishing I had some of them in my. But now they got them marked. They did a great job. Donnie and the guys last year did a wonderful job of marking them up. I can't steal them anymore. I mean, I would never think of stealing them, private property and all those sorts of things. So. I'm going to talk. You're going to have to listen to my monotone for an hour and a half. If you have a question, anytime that I'm talking, please just raise your hand and I'll try to ask and understand that there may be something where I may say, you know what, that's a wonderful question, but I can't answer that in this guise, so I'll have to wait. But I think it works better if you have a question, because we're going to bounce around a lot. I have a lot of. They gave me a big topic to cover: praxeology, supply and demand. And, well, it turns out that supply and demand, we'll see, are the same thing. So that makes it a little bit easier, right? Rothbard did a wonderful thing that. Even Stigler wrote a wonderful thing in his old microeconomics textbook on that. But so I only really have two things. The problem is Mises' book, Human Action, could be titled Praxeology, and I can see the green one up there. It's 983 pages, if I remember thereabouts. So if I'm going to talk about praxeology, 983 pages in 90 minutes or less. So if we do the math, that's 10 pages a minute. So good luck to me. So we'll see how that goes. But in all seriousness, what I'm going to try to do is give you a grounding in what basic praxeology, what we mean by praxeology, the basic tools of economics, the basic ideas that most economists. And the interesting thing here is I heard some questions earlier in Sheldon's talk about, you know, what do we call ourselves, what do we call things, what do we call people. One of the nice things about the talk I'm going to give is, by and large, regardless of what I call this and how I deliver this, there aren't any economists who don't believe demand curves are downward sloping, which means that they don't believe, there are no economists who don't believe that supply curves are upward sloping, which means there's no economists that don't believe that the interaction of supply and demand gives us prices. So it's really kind of cool to be able to talk about something that, if you don't believe that, you're not an economist. Anybody who tells you that demand curves don't slope downward is either lying to you or not an economist. You pick, right? I have somebody on my campus that frequently says, no, they could slope upward, and we kind of chuckle, and things like the minimum wage actually leads to more employment, which is a secret way of saying demand curves are upward sloping. So, so at least in that case, you know, unless you're a sociologist, and no offense, well, only a little bit of offense to the sociologists in the crowd, demand curves are downward sloping, will be downward sloping, and are downward sloping forever. So let's talk a little bit about what praxeology is, what the basic ideas of praxeology, a priorism, and then we'll run into a little bit of supply and demand. And I'm giving 4 lectures this week, and they're all one lecture. So wherever I end off, I'll just pick up and call it money or whatever it is I was talking about before. So there'll be lots of things that I'll blend all together. And I only have like 3 stacks of notes here that I'm going to be paging between, so we'll see how that works. But let's start talking about what exactly. And by the way, if I look like if I go this way too far, somebody wave me back this way, because they told me I can only stand like over to here and over to here, otherwise I disappear from the camera. So, you know, when we're a single camera sitcom, so I have to make sure I stay in the range. So we'll go from there and see how that works. And yeah, and real quick, I just found out I ran away for a minute because that was my crew chief. I'm going to Norman, Oklahoma on Thursday morning to work at Division I Regional. So if there's any Oklahoma fans, too bad. And I guess I'll get there sooner rather than, no, never mind. Anyway, that was really bad. All right. Let's talk about action, human action, praxeology. Mises argued that the economics is a branch of praxeology. I'm going to start talking about economics. So we're going to narrow our focus because this, after all, is the foundation for economic education. So I'll talk a little bit about economics. I'm guessing most of you have, how many of you have not ever had an economics course? Okay, so it's okay. You don't have to be embarrassed, because usually when I ask my students when I start the first day in class, I say, how many of you had economics in high school? And they raise their hands. I go, well, that's a lot of undoing I have to do. So if you don't have economics, it's not a big deal. We're going to take you through kind of the basic ideas of what the basics of economics is. Really what I want to try to do is like a first and a half lecture that I would do in economics, and kind of tie together and get the idea of where economics comes from, how it works, and why it's important. But Mises believed that praxeology comes from Latin words which mean practice and action and all those sorts of things. We won't talk about the etymology very much, but basically the idea is praxeology means human action. Economics is a branch of praxeology. Sociology is a branch of praxeology. Mises called psychology thymology is a branch of praxeology. Ethics are a branch of praxeology. All these things are branches of general idea of human action, the idea that humans act. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what Mises called the most well-developed branch of praxeology, economics. So we're going to talk a little bit about what economics is and the idea of action. Okay, so we're going to start with the idea of human action. Okay? All of economics is based on the idea that humans act. I heard Sheldon talk about the atomistic individual. I hope when we're done with this you get the idea that even hardcore libertarian, classical liberal, anarcho-capitalist, liberal, whatever you want to call us, guys, we don't believe that, in fact, we believe that individuals are not atoms. Look, I'm a volunteer firefighter. I've told people before, you couldn't pay me to do that job. Okay? That's how filthy, nasty, and rotten a job firefighting is. You couldn't pay me to do it. But I live in a community. One of the things you do when you live in a community is I believe, I'm not going to say I'm obligated because I'm really uncomfortable with things like obligations, but it's something you do when you live with people. I have to live with you, you have to live with me, we have to live with each other. Right? And if we have to live with each other, it works out a lot better if I scratch your back and you scratch mine, right? I'm a Smithian, right? I believe in the Smithian project, that we all have a tendency to truck, barter, and trade, not to rape, plunder, and pillage. So I'm not a Hobbesian. Okay, I don't believe the world is Lord of the Flies. I don't believe if Piggy has the conch, he's the winner, right? I don't think that's the way the world works. I think the world works in a way that, look, you do this for me, I'll do that for you. And if I do this for you, you'll do this for me, and then we find each other helping each other out. You help me, I help you, and now I told you I'm giving you my growth lecture in the last day, right, about how growth works. And it's all the same sort of process. So when we talk about individuals, and the most important part of human action is the idea, sometimes economics is called methodological individualism. Because the most important thing in economics is the study of the individual and the way the individual acts or chooses. Okay, so economics is about methodological individualism. What methodological individualism means is that the primary actor in this is the individual. Right? Sheldon mentioned government, and we like to talk about government, and I do it too because it's fun. Okay, but when we'll talk about why certain people go into government. We'll talk in another lecture. I'll talk about comparative advantage and things like that. But there's reasons for that. But we're talking about the way individuals choose. Okay, so the basic idea is humans act. Okay, humans act. What does human action mean? Human action is defined as purposeful behavior. Humans act purposefully. Okay, we don't, and in fact, there's a difference. There's some people want to argue between the difference between action and behavior. So you may have heard some psychologists are behaviorists, or there's behavioral economics. For a lot of us, the idea that we behave is weird, and we balk at it, because things like electricity behaves. Right? Not inanimate objects behave. If I take this, and I won't, because a good thing I didn't. If I let this thing go and it falls to the ground, it behaves. It behaves according to physical principles, right? Theory of gravity, things like that, right? I let it go, it behaves. It has to have a stimulus, and then it responds. If I just let it sit there like that, and the force is this way, this way, this way, in all the direction, all the vectors of forces are the same everywhere, it just sits there like that. It has no motion in and of itself. So what it does is it behaves. We don't behave, we act. We choose. Right? Individuals choose. We don't behave. There's a difference, a fundamental difference between, I think, between behavior and purposeful behavior. And that's why Mises in a lot of places talked about rational, throughout the word rational. I wouldn't use the word rational till about 3 or 4 years ago. I just wouldn't use the word. It bothered me, and I have since come off of that high horse, and now we'll use the word rational in lots of different ways. But we'll talk about what I mean by rational in a second. But anyway, we behave, act purposefully. Okay? What does it mean to act purposefully? To act purposefully means we have an end that we would like to obtain, and we use means to obtain that end according to ideas. I think that's almost verbatim what Murray says in Man, Economy, and State, if I remember right. Okay? We have ends. We use means to attain ends according to ideas. That's what action means. Okay? So that means all action is teleological. It's geared toward an end. Right? It's geared toward an end. Okay? So you have a goal. It's goal-oriented. If you want to think about it, end as goal, that works too. So it's goal-oriented. We're going to take an end, we have an end, and now we need some means to get to that end. Right? If I'm hungry, I want to eat. I want to satisfy that desire, that want. That's my end. Now I need some means to achieve that end. Chicken works. So I go home, I have some fried chicken and tell Pia the chicken was wonderful. I'm from the South, and that was good fried chicken. I know I don't sound like I'm from the South, but I lived there long enough, and I consider myself from the South now. I move really slow on hot days, and I don't get irritated by long lines anymore. So if that's not an indication you're from the South, nothing is, okay? It's a line, yeah, I know. It's just the way it is. And it's hot, so there's no sense in moving real fast. And I talk a lot slower than I used to, although they tell me I still talk fast. But it is the South. The chicken is the means, right, that I use to attain my end, right? The chicken is the means I use to attain my end. I have to have an idea, right? If I don't understand how chicken can be used to reach my end, then chicken isn't a means, right? It's not a means. So notice the means have to get mixed with the idea to attain the end. Now, one of the miserable things about means is that they're scarce. Right? We don't live in the Garden of Eden or whatever, land of cocaine, I think is the one that Mises used, like in Human Action. I had a colleague who used to have a picture of the land of cocaine, a painting. And I don't know if anybody's seen it, but there's a pig running around with a fork stuck in his side and a knife. And the land of cocaine is like the land of milk and honey, the land of plenty. If you look up the land of cocaine and you could cut from the pig, he'd run by you, cut what you want, eat, and he heals right back up. And whatever you want, you could have. The problem is we don't live there. Okay? We don't live there. Regardless of what politicians think and other people think about scarcity, we don't live there. Scarcity is all around us. If it weren't, we wouldn't have to choose. Right? If things weren't scarce, we wouldn't have to choose. Think about it for a minute. If things weren't scarce, we wouldn't have to choose. So how do I know the world is scarce? Things are scarce? Because we have to choose. Right? If things weren't scarce, we wouldn't have to choose. I choose, so things must be scarce. Ends, means must be scarce. We could all conjure up, I'm pretty sure our ends are unlimited. Right? If I sat down here and we started saying, what were the things that you would like to do or you would like to have? I'm pretty sure we could start now, end the seminar with that list. We just send you off and you just start writing a list and it would be endless. I know that. I have a teenage daughter and a teenage son, and I'm pretty doggone sure the list is endless. Okay? The problem is the means are not endless. Right? They're not endless. Or as my dad used to say, and when you get to be a dad, I think Sheldon can tell you this, you come with a manual. Right? I told my kids this all the time. You come with a manual and it has all the dad sayings in it. Right? You think money grows on trees? You know, all those sort of things. It comes in the manual and you have to say them after your kids are born. If you don't, then you're not a real dad. I'm fully convinced of that. And will you shut off the doggone lights? Right? What do you think this place is? Made of money? You know, all those sorts of things. But we'll talk about money later too. Money's another interesting mean to an end, and we'll talk about how we get money, and I'll talk about the concept of money later. Again, I told you I can't. And for those of you who aren't used to ADHD lectures, I apologize. Because I lecture in circles, so you kind of got to jump on and jump off and jump on and jump off. It's like the tilt-a-whirl. Right? You're going to go by the same spot a whole bunch of times, and we'll just catch up, and by the time you're done, there'll be like 8 or 10 circles, and they'll all connect. So I promise, just stick with me, and it'll all connect when it's all done. It'll be an entertaining ride, and I hope you don't throw up when you're done. But it'll be an entertaining ride nonetheless. Again, means are scarce, ends are not, so we have to choose. That means we can't attain all of our ends. Right? And at the very least, time is the resource that is absolutely scarce. Right? In the time-space continuum, we can't be in 2 places at once. Star Trek notwithstanding. All right? Because didn't they go, I haven't seen the new movie, didn't they go alternate time track or something? Isn't that the way they did it? Alternate unit, yeah, they went. So they can go anywhere, and the heck with Captain James Tiberius Kirk, he's off somewhere else, parallel universe sort of thing. Oh, I can imagine as Homer Simpson falling through for you guys, Homer falling through the Matrix, right? So if we talk about human action, and action, again, to come back to the idea of action in praxeology. Again, action is defined as applying ideas, right, with means to attain ends. That's what action is. So that means we have to choose because our means are limited. Okay? Praxeology is the study of the logical implications of this basic truth, that humans act. Mises argued that the idea that humans act is unfalsifiable, right? Because if you try to prove to me that you don't act, what are you doing? You're acting, right? You're using some means to attain an end, right? With an idea. Okay, and there are philosophers that would argue differently. I think Donnie last year would have argued with me endless on this, but if you want to have that argument, you can, but it's an interesting idea nonetheless. The idea, again, is that to argue against action is self-contradictory. What economics is following the logical implications of the axiom of action. So for Mises and for Austrians, everything stems from the axiom of action. Humans act. Okay? So everything stems from there. The law of demand comes from the axiom of action. And I hope we'll get to that point as we go through this. Okay? Again, economics is the most well-thought or the most well-developed branch of this idea of praxeology. Okay? Murray Rothbard argued that economics, in a paper that I think I put down that you might want to read, in some ways it's a little technical, but it's one of the best papers, short papers you can read on this idea of praxeology. He called it In Defense of Extreme A Priorism. Okay? Mises argued that if you start with the axiom of action, which you can't disprove, so it's therefore true, any conclusions that you reach using the rules of logic have to therefore be true. Right? Remember, for you logicians, there's no false conclusions, right? There's only false assumptions. Right? As long as your syllogisms are correct, your conclusions have to be correct, right? And there's a difference between truthful and useful and all that, and we won't get into that, okay? Leave that for the philosophers and the logic. But Rothbard argues to talk about economics, okay? We start with the idea of action, and from action, if we take 4 postulates, corollary postulates added to the axiom of action, we can spin out all of economics, okay? And he says the first axiom is, the first postulate is there's a variety of resources. There's a variety of resources, both human and natural. Look around. We're not all the same. Right? Some of you are smarter than I am. I'm better looking than all of you. Right? So we're all different. Look around. Some places are flat, some places are hilly, some places are really wet down there, other places are good for farming. There's probably some places where you can draw some granite out of around here, right? There's some core, there's lots of different things. Resources are varied. Rothbard called these empirical postulates. And empirical in the sense that you could look out of the door and go, wow, the world is different. Right? That's what we mean by empirical, as opposed to a different set of empirical. So both human and natural resources are varied. Seems easy enough, right? We look around, I don't think anybody would want to argue too vehemently that this wasn't true. Okay? Says the second thing we could argue, the second empirical postulate is that leisure is a consumer's good. Okay? And that's the fancy economic talk. For regular talk, that means you got to be paid to work. Okay? Work is a bad. What is a bad? In economics, a bad is something you want less of. A good is something you want more of. Other things equal, would you rather liege more or less? Okay, looking around the room, you're all about the age of my son, or most of you are, and my daughter, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to that question. Right? Leisure is a good. Okay? Leisure is a consumer's good. Therefore, leisure, which is the what do you call it on the other side of a coin? The obverse, right? The obverse is the other side of the coin. Leisure is the obverse of labor, is the obverse of leisure, right? So labor and leisure are two sides of the same coin, right? Leisure is good, labor is therefore a bad, okay? The third postulate, okay? The third postulate, and by the way, he says the first two are the only necessary ones to spin out economics. We don't need the other two. Okay. The first two are all that we need. We can get to the law of demand. We can get to lots of other laws, supply and demand, lots of other things from those two postulates. Rothbard argues that in that article. Okay. So the first two are the most important. Okay. And they give us all we need to know. The next two are necessary ones to give us limiting boundaries on what economics is. Okay. And this is what Rothbard argues. Okay, the third one is, and I got to make sure I say it right, indirect exchange occurs. Indirect exchange occurs. What is indirect exchange? If I trade you an apple for an orange, we've made a direct exchange, right? And I'm assuming that you want the apple, and I want the orange. So I'm an apple-owning orange wanter, and you're an orange-owning apple wanter. Okay? And if an orange-owning apple wanter meets an apple-owning orange wanter, and the two of them get together and make a trade, now the apple-owning orange wanter is improved his condition by having an orange, and the orange-owning apple wanter has improved his condition because he now has an apple. That's pretty good. That's the first time I ever came up with that apple-owning orange wanter thing, so I'm pretty proud of myself. Let me write. Can you write that down for me? I'm going to use that again. So that's direct exchange. But let's suppose you're an apple-owning orange wanter, but you can't find an orange-owning apple wanter. But you can find, never mind. Let's suppose you can find somebody else. So suppose the orange owner doesn't want an apple, but he wants a banana. But you can find a banana-owning apple wanter. You trade the apple with the banana owner, right? Now you have a banana, but you really didn't want the banana, you wanted an orange, so now you trade the banana for the orange. That's an indirect exchange. Okay? That's an indirect exchange. That is, I traded something in the middle. Later on, we're going to see that middle turns into money, which I told you I'm going to talk about tomorrow or Wednesday or something. I don't know, but we'll talk about money. Okay? So the third postulate is that indirect exchange occurs. Or what Mises would say is we're studying the catallaxy. C-A-T-A-L, two L's or one? A-X-Y. C-A-T-A-L-L-A-X-Y. Catallaxy. Or catalactics. A-C-T-I-C-S. Catalactics. Okay? Catalactics is the study of market exchange. And some reverend used that word first. And why can't I remember his name? Does anybody remember who it was? Was it? Oh, man. I have to look it up. It's in Human Action somewhere. I didn't plan on saying that. And that's one of the problems of doing these things stream of conscious. These notes, by the way, are just gibberish. I'm making this stuff up as I go along. There's nothing really on the page here that you can make it. What's that?
Brainwashing.
But yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. The only difference between my brainwashing and a Soviet socialist or evil brainwashing is if you want to get up and leave, go ahead. You're entitled to leave the truth if you want to. Ignorance is bliss, right? The fourth postulate is that firms maximize money profit. Firms maximize money profit. In fact, we could generalize that, I think, to just individuals maximize profit. And I'll talk to you about how I could generalize that in a second. But firms maximize money profit. Okay? And the reason for that assumption is it makes it a little bit easier to track the behavior of firms when we talk about firms making decisions to produce, if we make the assumption that they maximize profit and not the well-being of their brother's ne'er-do-well son, right? Because sometimes we know that does happen. They do occasionally employ their ne'er-do-well nephews, and if we made economics based on the idea that all business owners employ their ne'er-do-well nephews, it would make for difficult economics. So we're just going to assume that when you go into business, what you really want to do is maximize money profit, okay? And that's, I remember one time being at Ben & Jerry's up in Waterbury, Vermont, and my brother at the time had read Machinery of Freedom, Man, Economy, and State, and For a New Liberty. And he had turned himself into an anarcho-capitalist in about a month and a half. And we were at Ben & Jerry's, and they have their wonderful thing about their social responsibility, and they word it all, and if you read it right, it just says, we promise to maximize profit. I wish I had taken a picture of it and kept, but if you read Ben & Jerry's little statement, and my brother looks at it, he goes, why is that different than maximizing profit? Shh, we're just eating ice cream, let it go. Or in the factory, he goes, no, they want to maximize. I understand, just let's have the ice cream and go. They're giving it to us for nothing. Come on, it's coming right off the line, it's Cherry Garcia, let's go. And he finally shut up, but it took a while. Okay. So, economics can be spun out from the axiom of action. Resources, the empirical postulate, resources are varied. Okay. The second one was leisure is a consumer's good. The third one is indirect exchange takes place. The fourth one is firms maximize money profits. So we can spin out all of economics, kill it before it gets away. We can spin out all of economics from those four postulates, is what Rothbard argues. Okay, I'm going to take this in a little bit direction instead of continuing to follow along with Rothbard and talk directly about the axioms of action and all that kind of stuff. But add to that the idea, one of the very first sentence of Menger, Karl Menger's Grundsatz, which you have to say if you want to be an Austrian and be in the club, you can't say the principles, you have to say Grundsatz, right? You can't say principles, you have to say Grundsatz, okay? So in the Grundsatz, Menger's very first sentence says all the world is governed by the law of cause and effect, basically. Okay? All the world is governed by the law of cause and effect. So one of the most important things to understand is we believe in causality. We wouldn't choose if we didn't believe in causality. Right? We wouldn't choose if we didn't believe that our actions could bring about the ends. Our actions could bring about the ends that we believe they could bring about, right? Otherwise, we don't believe the world is random. There are random elements in the world, but the world, and by the way, if you say random, another real good word to use, so you show that star-kissed, you have good taste. Most of you guys are too young to remember that. Remember Charlie? You ever seen the Star-Kissed tuna commercials? They got the little Charlie, and he always wore like the suit and the tie, and he sat at the table, and he said, and they always said, no, Charlie, Star-Kissed doesn't want tunas with good taste. They want tunas that taste good. But anyway, so these are my way of working in breaks. When your brains start to hurt, I tell stupid jokes that mean nothing to anybody but me. And your brain gets to rest for a minute, and then off we go again. So it's like this diminishing marginal utility, which we'll talk about later. And then we tell a bad joke, boom, we jump back up here, and we go like this again, bad joke. So that's the way it works. You know, there's only method to the madness. It's not completely random. Otherwise, I wouldn't believe what I teach. So if you want to say show star-kissed, you got good taste, you say stochastic. Okay? And if you really want to go out and show the Austrians you have good taste, you say collidic. Right? Because then you get to bring Shackle into the mess. Okay? And then you get to argue with the staunch Rothbardians about what a lunatic Shackle was, and then you can mention Lockman, and then off you go into discussions you don't really want to have. But it keeps them happy and busy, and you can walk out of the room and come back and they're still talking, and have a beer and come back and they're still talking, and provided you're old enough, of course, to drink a beer, because we all know that if you're not 18 somehow, now that's a different talk. Public choice talk later. All right? So if we take this idea of action, and that we have means and ends, basically economics, and I steal this from Pete Boettke's book, which comes from Haynes' textbook, is that when we look out the world, economics is about looking out at the world and trying to understand the world around us. Right? I want to understand the world around us. And we look around, and you know what? The world is pretty doggone orderly. Right? I don't remember who said, after all, Paris gets fed. Was that Bastiat that said that, or it had to be somebody else? Okay, attributed to Bastiat. After all, Paris gets fed. The way I put it, because I teach at an all-male school in rural Virginia, I say, after all, Farmville gets beer. Right? After all, Farmville gets beer. New York gets pizza, okay? Since we're in New York, right? New York gets pizza. If you want a pizza, you don't have to call up. If you come here, and I imagine you'll have some pizza sometime when you're here, yes, with the big pepperonis on it? Awesome. You'll have some pizza, but you didn't have to call ahead before you left wherever you were and said, hey, I'm coming. We're going to need some pizza, and it's going to be 10 days from now. Right? You just show up, you walk into the pizza joint, and you tell the dude, I want some pizza. And he says, okay, what kind of pizza? You say, I like some pepperoni on my pizza. Okay, pepperoni pizza. He takes your word that you're going to pay him, right? You take his word that he's going to bring you pepperoni pizza. So notice, trust is very important in market economics, contrary to what most people tell you. Markets can't work without trust. In fact, the most trustworthy people are the people that deal in markets all the time. Because if you can't be trusted, nobody will exchange with you. You know, as a corollary, and I told you I can't help this. We're on the thing, and now it's like remember not the Etch-a-Sketch. What were the other one? The Kaleidos. Remember you had the wheels. Sheldon, you remember that when we were kids. Spirograph, and you put the wheels in, you connect them, and you make the big circles. So we're on the spirograph, and here we go again. Okay, I forgot what I was going to say. No, if you don't trust each other, markets can't work. And trust is a very important part to markets. And the people who tell you that they can't be trusted are probably not people that engage in markets. Right? You think about it. Who do you trust more? Walmart or Obama? And it's not Obama because last year I said Walmart or Bush, right? Or whatever, right? Well, who do you trust more? oh, I'm sorry, I'm off camera. If you think about, the ideas, everybody talked about how markets are terrible and there's no trust. Look at Enron. How long did it take Enron to disappear from the face of the planet when we found out they were cheating? Week? 10 days? Bush told us there were weapons of mass destruction in 2001. We just got rid of the dude. Where is trust more important? If you don't have your reputation in a market, you got nothing. Right? That's why, for example, you ever wonder why businesses spend lots of money on celebrity endorsements? Because they're trying to signal to you, hey, we're going to be around long enough to pay this dude. Right? Why do banks have giant marble columns, right? And other things operate out of aluminum steel Butler buildings? Would you put your money in a place that was a Butler building? Would you buy candy out of a Butler building? Okay? So the bank makes these beautiful marble floors and marble columns and mahogany walls. Why? Because they're trying to signal to you, look, we're not going to pick this place up, fold it up like the Jetsons in a suitcase and carry it away tomorrow. Right? Sheldon, I love that you get my Jetsons joke and nobody else did. God bless you. It's just not going to happen. Right? And why is that? Because we're trying to signal trust. No trust, no markets. Okay, so I'm trying to understand how the heck is it that New York gets pizza? That's a pretty cool thing to figure out, isn't it? Most of you probably never thought about that. You just go to Walmart or I don't know wherever you're from. Where I'm from, it's, you go to Kroger or U-Crops or wherever it is, Stop and Shop where I used to be from, and I go in and I pick up my gallon of milk and I leave. And dadgummit, every time I go in there, there's milk. How in the world does this happen? Think about that for a minute. How in the world does this happen? There's no commissar, right? And we know how well it works when the commissar tells it, right? Go into a grocery store in Cuba and get you some milk. You think that's going to happen? If you can find a grocery store, right? How does that happen? That's what economics is about, right? Trying to understand how that happens. Economics is an incredibly humbling discipline. Now, we sound like we're blowhards and puffed up. Put me and Betke in a room together and you ain't getting a word in edgewise. It's just not going to happen, right? But we're humbled by what we see, and we're fascinated by it. Economics is fascinating because of this stuff. So our basic premise is this. From when I talk about economics, my basic premise is this. All social phenomena emerge from the actions and interactions of individuals. Right? It's not new to me. I stole this right from Hayne Betke Prochitko, who stole it from Hayne. And God rest his soul, Paul Hayne's textbook is as good as it gets when it comes to basic economics. It's called The Economic Way of Thinking. But all social phenomena emerge from the actions and interactions of individuals who make choices, right? There's my choice again from Praxeology, right? Who make choices after weighing additional expected benefits and costs to themselves. I'll say it again. Probably in a different way, but I'll try to say it again. Okay? All social phenomena emerge from the actions and interactions of individuals who make choices after weighing expected additional benefits and costs to themselves. That's what economics is about. Okay? All social phenomena. That means where you sit in this room. Were there any rules about where you sat, by the way? Any rules? Did we all manage to find a seat? Anybody sitting where he wasn't the first time? Did you get a dirty look when you sat in somebody else's seat? You did, didn't you? Right? I'm willing to bet from now until Thursday you'll all sit in these seats where you are right now. That's a rule, right? Right? Okay, now I've ruined the game, right? But seriously, you come in, you find a seat, you'll sit down, and this is the Catholic row. Okay? Right? I know my wife makes me sit in the front pew. Okay, so and there's never a problem. You can be late too, so you walk right in, just as right in front of the priest, and you're always going to have a seat. Right? It never fails. but here it is right here, the spitting row. But we come in and you're going to the pattern of where you sit in this classroom, the pattern that's coming up I-87 here that looks like chaos is a social phenomena. Traffic moves. Traffic moves in a relatively well-organized patterns. Anybody ever been in a city and looked at the traffic from up on top of the city as it moves out at night? There's a pattern, isn't there? And there's people moving in and out, and all these things happen. That's a social phenomena. How does it happen? There's nobody standing there going, you get in this lane, you get in this lane, you get in that lane. Everybody manages to get in the lane, follow the rules, which we'll talk about in a second, follow the rules and get to where you're going. I once flew out of Orlando right at the beginning, right after 9/11, and the TSA, which the pilots tell me they call thousands standing around. And I walk in, if you've ever flown out of Orlando, there's a beautiful atrium. You go into the atrium, and then you go in, and then you go in, and there's two entrances. At this time, there's one entrance into the maze. And you go into the maze, and and then you all pop out in the same place. So it doesn't matter where you go in the maze, you're all coming out in the same hole. And then there's a TSA guy who stands there like this and goes, you go over here, and you go over there, and you go over there, no, and you go over there. Now, if you've ever been flown out of an airport, and you do this, when you're coming through that maze, you're looking at the lines, aren't you? You're going, okay, businessmen over there, they got their shoes off, their suitcases out, their laptop there. I know that line's 10 deep, but we're at Disney World, and there's a family with a cart and Mickey Mouse and the hands, and they're crying, and I ain't getting in that line, right? But you're making all of these decisions, right? You're weighing expected costs and benefits to yourself as you make these decisions about where to be in these lines. Well, you're doing the same thing on the highway. So I get all the way up to the line, and I'm going there. There's 5 businessmen deep. They got their shoes off, their laptops in their hand, their jacket. They know the rules. I'm in. He goes, you, over there. Where? Over there. Now, he has a gun or access to somebody who does, right? So I'm not going to go, no, dude, I'm going over there. So I go over there and I look at the other line and it's going, I'm getting whiplash walking. Mom and the kids got bags and stuff's tipped over, and we got to put the bear through, and then the Mickey Mouse, and then the cart, and then the diaper bag, and the bottles, and the... But imagine what it would be like on the highway if you had a dude standing up on the exit ramp going, you go over there, you go over there, you go... They couldn't even, one TSA dude couldn't even put me in line. And they expect to run the banking system. Right? And it's got nothing to do with stupidity or lack of intelligence. It has to do with ignorance. Right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it has to do with ignorance. It's the same principle. If I couldn't put people in lines, right? You walk in, David Friedman asked a great question in his book about why is it that the lines always move at the same rate in the grocery store? For the same reason they move in the same rate on the highway. Because think about what we're talking about. Social phenomena emerge from choices. If I get in this lane, it's going a little bit faster, I can move a little faster. When I move over, my action creates an interaction with the guy behind me, right? When I move over, this lane moves a little slower, this lane moves a little faster. So now the lanes have become more equalized, haven't they? Somebody else is making that decision from here to here, and from here to here, and from here to here, and all the lanes move roughly the same speed. Now don't jump to the conclusion then, then what we need to do is tell people which lines to get in, and then they'll all stay in the same lines and they'll move at the same rate. Why do the lines move at the same rate? Because individuals with ends in their brain, using their means according to their ideas, are making decisions about where to drive, about which lane to be in. That's economics. That's what economics is about. Okay, that's the basic fundamental idea of economics. Individuals make choices, right? All social phenomena emerge from the actions and interactions of individuals who make choices after weighing additional benefits and costs to themselves. Who do the costs and benefits matter to when you make a line change decision on the highway? To you, right? Who do they matter to the TSA dude when he says stand over there? Does he bear any of the cost to a bad decision? So what's his incentive? There's another good word in economics. What's his incentive to change that? Not very much, right? Does that make him a bad guy? No, it just means he's reacting to different incentives. Right? You take the same people, put them in Walmart, and put them at the DMV, I'm willing to bet you the lines move more slowly at the DMV than they do at Walmart. Because what happens if the lines move slowly at the DMV if we're talking about incentives? What happens? Does anybody lose any profit? Because remember, we assumed firms want to maximize money profit, right? Do any firms lose any profit? At Walmart, what happens if people start getting aggravated in line? They go to Kmart, right? And if you're a stockholder in Walmart, do you want people to go to Kmart? Now, what's that got to do with the person that's checking you out at the store? Well, if the line gets long and I complain to the manager knows if he doesn't keep his super manager or whatever, regional manager happy, then the regional manager doesn't keep the super regional manager happy, and then the super regional manager doesn't keep the World Series, wait a minute, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about baseball, happy. And then the stockholder's not happy, and then what happens? He gets in trouble, oh, and you're done. Right? Where does that work in the DMV? Now, I don't know where you're from. This is the cool, have you seen the cool trick the DMV does now to pretend their lines are long? Now, where I live in Farmville, Virginia, okay? We were better in the old way than the new way. The lines are a little, but you walk into the DMV, and you have to go, all lines go through the information desk. You can't pick a line. You got to go to the information lady. You go to the information lady, and then some people don't understand that this is the checker lady, so they start to ask her questions, and she answers, and you're going, I know I'm going in that line. See, that one says renew registration. That's what I have to do. I'm going over there. She's going to give me a ticket that tells me to go over there. But I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and I answer the questions. Then I get there, and she hands me the ticket. Go in that line. When she hands me the ticket, the clock starts running. Tick, 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 tick. Pretty cool, huh? So I'm going to make my line shorter by making people wait in a long line before they get counted for being in line. Can you imagine if Walmart did that? All right, everybody right here, single file right here, we'll tell you which line to get in. Right? Does that make the people at DMV bad people? No, they react to incentives differently. So again, actions and interactions weighing cost and benefits to themselves. To themselves. That's what economics is about. Okay? So notice a couple of things. Again, choice is important. Right? Choice is important. Costs and benefits are important. We're going to see that rules of the game are important. So in this implication, what are we doing? We're saying choice exists. If you don't believe choice exists, you can't be an economist. You could be something else and might even be a productive citizen. I'm not sure. But if you don't believe choice exists, then you can't be an economist. You're something else. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means you're something else. That's what I always tell my psychologist friends. You're something else. Okay? You're not an economist. You're something else. Okay? But choice exists. Okay? We also said only individuals choose. There's our methodological individualism, right? And then they have to choose after weighing costs and benefits. And we're going to come back to that in a second. So what do we say? Economics, when we think about economics and we put it to work, and this idea of praxeology, there's three important aspects that we have to deal with. First, when we talk about actions, right? There's actions, interactions, and consequences. Actions, interactions, and consequences. When we talk about action, praxeology, choice, scarcity is the core problem. If there was no scarcity, we wouldn't have to choose. So scarcity is the core problem. one of the interesting things is if we talk about implications, a simple implication of this, simple logical implication of this is that economizing and trade-offs have to be made. We have to economize. What does economize mean? Economize means that given a set of ends, given an end, let's put it this way, given an end, I will try to achieve it as cheaply as possible. Okay, given an end, I will try to use as few means as possible to attain it. Or, given a pile of means, I will try to attain as many ends as possible. They're two sides of the same thing. Right? Think about it. If grandma gives you $100 for Christmas or your birthday, what do? You start to think about how many things you could buy, right? And if I buy this, that means if I get that cheaper, then I could, right? If I could buy this one a little cheaper, I might, instead of just getting a pair of shoes, I could get shoes and a shirt. And I know if I go over there, maybe I get shoes and a shirt and a hat, right? So given the ends, the means, I try to attain as many ends as I can, or given an end, I try to attain it as cheaply as possible. Why? Because life is full of trade-offs. Why? Because the world is scarce. Everything is scarce. So we have to make trade-offs. The most fundamental trade-off is I can't be in two places at the same time. Unless I'm James Tiberius Kirk and I'm working in two different universes, right? Which would be kind of funny because universe 2, the etymology of that word doesn't work right, does it? Universe and parallel and, I mean, a little confused by the whole. I can't help it. I'm a liberal arts guy, and we do this all the time. Good thing I don't have an internet connection because we look up words. Merriam-Webster runs in the background of all my classes, and when guys look at me like they don't understand the words, and when I say guys, it's because I teach at one of the only 2 all-male schools left in the country, and we like to say we offer true choice, right? Because there's plenty of co-ed institutions in the country, and there's only 2 of us. And we're a lot better than Wabash anyway, so you don't want to go there, and it's in Crawfordsville, Indiana, for God's sake. Yeah, but they got all of Goodrich's money. Scarcity makes economizing necessary, right? So economizing, trade-offs, are a logical implication of the idea of praxeology of choice. Second thing is interactions. Okay? Second thing is interactions. Interactions means that when we choose, we all live in a world together, right? We live in a social world. I said social phenomena. So my choices have effects on your choices. That's where the interactions come into place. If I move over a lane, that's going to affect you. You're either going to speed up in the lane behind me or slow down in the lane behind me, whatever. The choices I make are going to have effects on other people. Okay? So there's interactions. One of the core problems to interactions, the core problem to action was scarcity. The core problem to interactions is a multiplicity of diverse goals. A multiplicity of diverse goals. Or if you don't like diverse goals, one of the things we say is individual projects. Right? One of the things that we also talk about, and here's one of the tangents, and I'll circle back around and say the sentence again in a second, is when we talk about whether individuals are selfish or self-interested, and we all know that Ayn Rand wrote a book called In the Virtue of Selfishness and all those sorts of things. When we talk about economics, we talk about self-interest. Okay? What I mean by self-interest is I pursue the projects I'm interested in. You pursue the projects you're interested in. Those projects might be like, I have a hard time, and we always use the example, in some cases, in some ways it's just trivial, that it'd be hard-pressed to call Mother Teresa selfish. Right? She wins a Nobel Prize and then builds a leprosarium. Christopher Hitchens notwithstanding, right? Because he's not a real big fan of Mother Teresa. So you want to know that debate, go read. That's a very interesting debate. But anyway, We believe that individuals are interested in the projects that they're going to pursue. One of the problems that we have when we have multiplicity of diverse projects is they may not be commensurate. That is, you may be pursuing a goal and I may be pursuing a goal that are diametrically opposed, but our actions bring us in interaction with each other. How do we end up to act peacefully? Right? Imagine we're both driving up the highway and we're both going to the same court. You're suing me. We're driving on the highway, my actions and your actions and our interactions, we don't know each other's in the cars. We're driving and we're both on the highway ostensibly pursuing the same end, but it's not even close to the same end, is it? But we have a multiplicity of sometimes not even commensurate goals. How do we deal with that? Right? Because think about what we're after. Ultimately, if we live in a world, a social world, what are we after? Cooperation. Coordination, right? Coordination. Right? The Austrian economists' two favorite C words. Coordinate and cooperate. Right? What are we after? We're after coordination and cooperation. This room is coordinated, isn't it? Where you sit and the process we got here is all coordinated, isn't it? And you all cooperated, didn't you? I don't remember seeing any fist fights getting in here. For Sheldon's lecture, I saw a couple in the back. One guy couldn't get in. He's like, get out of that seat. I'm not standing up. Okay? But by and large, we cooperated with each other, didn't we? Anybody tell you to cooperate when you walked in? Anybody say, all right, listen up. Was Ben back there going, listen, I need you to be coordinated and you better cooperate or I'm sending you home. He waited till you came in to tell you that, right? But we all got here and we were all coordinated and cooperated. So coordination and cooperation are what give us social phenomena, right? How does Farmville get beer? How does New York get pizza without the coordination and cooperation of lots and lots of different people? Now you guys might be right about the right age. How many of you guys grew up with Richard Scarry? Remember Richard Scarry, Busy Town? Okay, Busy Town rocks. Anybody have the Busy Town computer game? My kids had that. I loved Busy Town computer game. I would play Busy Town because you go into the bakery and you wanted to get some food, some bread. Well, you could then go through the process to bake the bread. But to get the bread, you had to have the flour. So you could take the flour and you could go back one step and go over to the miller. And the miller could go back one step and go over to the farmer. Right? So to get that bread in Busy Town, to get your bagel, you had to have the cooperation of the bagel dude, the miller, the farmer, the guy that made the tractor, right? And the delivery truck dude. Right? And they pointed out, Richard Scarry pointed out so much economics that everybody who ever runs for office has missed in a very simple children's book, in a simple children's game. That without the cooperation of the guy that owns the tractor, the guy that owns the mill, the guy that got the seeds, the farmer, right, all of those people, we don't get a bagel. And the world would be a lot less good place if it weren't for bagels. Right? There's something right about a good bagel. And let me tell you something. In Farmville, Virginia, I don't get a lot of good bagels. Okay? Don't get a lot of good bagels. Or bread. Now I get me some cauliflower and some fried okra and some fried chicken. Not as good as Pia's. 10 minutes? Wow. All right. Damn. Last one, consequences of the third implication is consequences. Look, we only got through this much. We're in trouble. Scrap the other lectures. We're just getting this one for the whole time. All right. Anyway, the third thing that we have to talk about is consequences. One of the things that economists are really interested in is unintended consequences. And the interesting thing about economics is the order that we see is the unintended consequence of the choices that you make. The order in the world that we see is an unintended consequence of the decisions that you make. So consequences, in particular unintended consequences. A lot of people don't like economists because we're really good at looking at unintended consequences. So they don't like us because when they say, here's what we're going to do, and we say, well, that's interesting. But if you do that, what's going to happen? For example, Ben Powell will tell you about business cycles. He'll say, yeah, printing up money sounds like a really good idea. More people have money, they spend more money. The problem is if you do that, you distort the structure of production, you change the rate of time preference, people move their choices around, and we end up building stuff we really don't want, and then, boom, we get a recession. Oh, no, that won't happen. No, really, it'll happen. It's happened all the time. Every time we do it, it happens. No, it won't happen this time. It'll be different. Why don't you economists shut up and go away? Or you Austrians shut up and go away. We're Keynesians and we know how to fix it. And so we're in a recession. Anyway, all right. When we talk about and I got 4 minutes now. I thought I had till 9 o'clock. What's that? Q&A is going on right now. Can't you see it? I'm asking lots of questions and giving lots of answers. By the way, which reminds me, is one of my favorite quotes about learning, is that learning is a product of the questions you not ask, not the answers that you give. Remember, every answer that you know is somebody else asked a question. And you don't learn anything by giving answers. You learn things by asking questions, right? And one of the things that economics asks is lots of questions like, holy crap, how did Farmville get beer? Right? How did New York get pizza? Right? That's pretty cool. But anyway, I said I don't like the word rational, but we're going to go ahead, ask me a question if you want. We'll blend it, we'll make it all together. There, now I got 10 more minutes.
When you say consequences, is that the same thing as externalities?
Could be. Okay. Externalities is it could be. Right? If I make a choice, I'm sorry. He said if, he was projecting so I could hear very well. He asked, are externalities the same as consequences? Externality is a fancy economic word for this. Remember I said that we weigh costs and benefits to ourselves. Okay? If I do something and there's a cost that I create that I don't have to take into consideration, what I've done is create an externality. Or if there's a benefit that I create that I can't take into consideration. Like I used to live, when I lived in Medford, Massachusetts, I used to live next door to Sal and Lydia Bonaventura. Nice Irish couple. Okay? And they, being a good Irish couple, had lots of nice flowers and flower beds, and Sal used to like the work. So Sal was intending to make his place look nice, and he liked flowers, and they bloomed, and it was beautiful. But when I walked by his house every day, I go, wow, that's really beautiful. Right? So I got a benefit that he didn't consider. That's an externality. Right? So, or if you drive your car by my house and it makes a lot of noise, that's an externality. That's not a cost that you have to incur. And that, one of the things is when we talk about costs and benefits, if there are costs that you can create that you don't have to take into consideration, you're going to do a lot more of that thing than I would like you to do. So one of the keys, and this is why property rights, and we'll talk about property rights over and over again this week, this is why property rights are important. Because generally where we get these externalities is in cases where property rights aren't very well defined, or it's very difficult to define property rights. Because if we could internalize all costs and benefits, then there wouldn't be a problem. From an economic standpoint, okay? That's a good question. It's one that takes us off a little bit, but that's a good question. Consequences are a little bit different. Like order is a consequence of the choices you made. Unintended consequences would be, since we're talking about supply and demand curves are downward sloping, supply, we have the basic idea that demand curves, right? We said people make choices after weighing costs and benefits, okay? They make choices after weighing costs and benefits. The general rule in all of this when we talk about costs and benefits is people are rational. What do we mean by rational? Rational means they choose after weighing costs and benefits, which leads me to this. By and large, if it's more expensive for you to do something, whether it's more painful, more costly in monetary terms, whatever it is, you'll want less of something, right? So if you stick your hand in the light socket and it goes like that, well, that was a bad thing. I want less of sticking my hand in the light socket, right? But if you stuck your finger in the light socket and it gave you a massage, wow, right? I do more of it, right? So if something is costly, you want less of it. If something is less costly, you want more of it. Or if the way to look at it is, as the sacrifice you have to make rises, you'll do less of something. As the sacrifice you make falls, you'll do more of something. In economics, we just make it really simple and we say the price is the sacrifice, and we'll come over here and we'll call Q the quantity, the amount of something. So there's that idea in a graph. And since pictures are worth 1,000 words, there they are. All 1,000 of them, right? Right? When the sacrifice falls, you want more of it. When the sacrifice rises, you want less of it. That's pretty simple what a demand curve is.
Unless it's a gift and good.
No such thing. And, by the way, Giffen good only works, if you draw out the stuff, a Giffen good only works on a tiny part of the demand curve way over here when the good is an inferior good, even from a standard project. Try to draw a Giffen good using utility curves sometime and see how hard it is.
Yeah, but it has to be a budget constraint.
No, I'm saying it has to be, a Giffen good only works over a very tiny range of the budget constraint. The good has to be inferior, and it has to happen only at very, very low incomes, under very, very rare circumstances. So Giffen goods do not have demand curves that are upward sloping throughout. They have a blip in the demand curve. It goes boop, boop.
They have a V curve.
It's a blip. It's a mythological beast.
It's not a mythological beast when you...
Give me one. Give me one. Okay, that's great, except it didn't work. When they go back and they do the research, when you hold other things constant, which they didn't do, this is all assumes other things are constant, right? Other things constant, when I draw this demand curve, means that we didn't have a famine, and that the price of potatoes didn't rise so much that other things became cheaper, that all other things remained equal. In Ireland, when you control for all of those things, the Giffen good goes away.
Send me a link to that article.
I'd have to look it up and find it, but it's been years. I didn't know anybody still believed that stuff. And it's not your fault, right? Somebody told you that.
Standard.
Yeah, I know it's standard because of the way neoclassical economists draw demand curves. It has to be. It has to work, and it only works over a little tiny range. And it's such a small part of microeconomics that I don't even know why. Because when I teach microeconomics, we barely even mention it. But you're right, it does exist theoretically, but in the real world it just doesn't. They don't exist. They just don't. Yeah.
I'm not really familiar with that term.
A Giffen good is a mythological beast. Okay? No, in all seriousness, and I'm having fun at his expense, and I'll apologize in public. A Giffen good is a good. There's a very small range, and the way neoclassical economists develop demand curves is not by this basic idea of sacrifice and choice. It has to do with bundles of goods and indifference curves and this long, sorted mathematical functions. And if you're good with math, I can show you very briefly. I won't do it in here. A Giffen good is a case where in economics, when the price of a good falls, there's two things that can happen. Like we see this with gasoline is a really good example. Generally, our demand for gasoline is going to be downward sloping, but we're not going to change how much gasoline we buy by a very often, right? So we might take a few little less trips when the price of gas goes up a lot. We all saw this, right? Gas has changed price rapidly in the last 2 years. When the price of gasoline falls, other things equal, it's like getting an increase in your income, right? Because if I buy 10 gallons of gas a week and the price of gas falls $2, I got 20 bucks in my pocket, okay? Similarly, when the price of gas rises, it's like taking income away from me, okay? There's two effects that go on when you build a demand curve. One's called the income effect, one's called the substitution effect. So when the price of a good falls, you get an income effect that says to buy more or less of the good. and you get a price effect that says always to buy more. So let's forget the price effect. The income effect, there's two types of goods. If your income went up, would you buy more or less hot dogs?
If you have more money, you buy more.
More hot dogs?
Oh.
I mean, other than...
I guess you buy something that was better.
Well, right, you might buy lobsters or steak or something, right? Right, you go have a better dinner, right? So the point is there's some goods that if your income went up, you'd buy less of them. Those are called inferior goods, okay? A given good is a special case, theoretical case of an inferior good that when the price of the good falls, your income goes up so much that this good goes, it works exactly in the opposite direction to overtake the price effect, and you end up, when the price falls, of actually buying less of the good. And when the price rises, buying more of the good. It's a very rare, it's a very specific case of it's basically a mathematical anomaly is what it is. And it's part and parcel to the way the theory works. When we talk about economics from an Austrian perspective, Mises believed that demand curves were downward sloping a priori. Right? Actually, I'm sorry, apodictically true. And a priori means that we start with the basic idea of the axiom of action. I have 1 minute 20 times. The idea of a priorism, or the human action, is that this is absolutely a logical necessity because of the way demand is built. We're only touching the beginning of the way demand is built. Real quick, and I understand what you're saying, but let's talk real quick because I got a minute, and we'll take up the Giffen good as we move along, then I'll answer questions and sneak in more of my lecture as I answer questions. But we're talking about rationality, and this rationality is really important, and I apologize, I was trying to have some fun at your expense, and if it was too much, I'm sorry. I never mean to offend anyone unless I tell them I mean to offend you. And so I'm not trying to offend you at all. When we talk about rational choice, real quick, because you brought up the budget, so I'm going to try to pack in 2 minutes, 1 minute worth of lecture. Okay? Okay. All right. When we talk about rationality, again, we're talking about people make trade-offs. Okay? And again, as the cost of an action becomes, as the cost rises, we'll do less of something. As the cost falls, we'll do more of it. Cost could mean easier, cheaper, more beneficial, right? Any of these things. It could be any of these things. It doesn't have to just be money. Okay, so we're not talking about money. When people weigh their choices, when they make choices, we're all subject to constraints. You heard him use the word constraint. I would love to be in the NBA. Okay? But they made a movie about guys like me and we can't jump. Okay? All right? And unfortunately, I'm only 5'10". 5'9 3/4". Not 5'10". Okay? So I face physical constraints, right? I face physical constraints. We all face constraints on the choice we make. Those constraints could be money, they could be physical, they could be all sorts of different things. But when we make choices, we weigh costs and benefits subject to some constraints. So when we talk about these constraints, we can talk about them as our budget. Right? We have a budget. And our budget constrains all of the choices we make. The other thing that we have to consider when we talk about costs and benefits, and we say it's not just about money, is one of the very important things about Austrian economics is the idea of subjectivism. What subjectivism means is not like you would use subjective in having a, well, that's just subjective, meaning I don't like your taste. Right? When you say that to somebody, that's what you mean, right? I don't like your taste. Subjectivism from an Austrian perspective is more deeply rooted. What subjectivism means is you view the world and filter the world through your brain. Okay? That's how you see the world. That's how I see the world. That's how we all see the world. When I decide on what a cost or a benefit is, I do it with my brain. So if I'm doing it with my brain, it's subject to my interpretation. So subjectivism means that I'm viewing things through my perspective. So not only is value subjective, right? Everything is subjective. We might all agree that this is a chair, that it's here, but I might see it as a table. I might see it as a ladder. I might see it as something else. That's one way we can look at subjectivism. One is I like blue. You like red. That's another way to look at subjectivism. But expectations are subjective. The point of subjectivism is we filter everything through our own heads, which is the opposite of objective, right? Objective means that regardless of who is looking at the thing, perceiving the thing, it's the same, right? We all perceive this thing the same, whatever we call it, whatever we name it. Light is hitting this and being reflected in our retina and going to our brain, and for the most part, this thing is an objective reality, right? Try to walk through it. Tell me it's not. But the rest of this about what I could use this for, how it tastes, how important it is, all of those things that surround action are subjective. One of my favorite quotes, one of my favorite economists is Tom Sowell, puts subjectivism this way, and we'll quit with this thought, and actually wrap up, and then we'll quit with that thought, ask questions. He said, the real problem is that the knowledge needed, okay, and he's talking about making decisions. He says the real problem, and don't try to take this down because it's a long quote, I'll just read you the important parts. He says, the real problem, and this comes from the book called Knowledge and Decisions, which is one of the best books on economics you could ever read, by Thomas Sowell. It was written in 1978, 79, something like that. The real problem is that the knowledge needed is a knowledge of subjective patterns of trade-off that are nowhere articulated. Not even to the individual himself. Okay? I might think that if faced with the stark prospect of bankruptcy, I would rather sell my automobile than my furniture, or sacrifice a refrigerator rather than a stove. But unless and until such a moment comes, I will never know even my own trade-offs, much less anybody else's. This is the core problem to central planning. I don't even know my own trade-offs. Right? I could talk till I'm blue in the face about, yeah, if that happened to me, I would do this. But when push comes to shove, what do? That's the nature of subjectivism. So when we talk about these idea of cost and this idea of kind of summing all this stuff up, is rational individuals respond to trade-offs and incentives. Think about consequences and have intelligible motives. Okay, we have ends. They're intelligible. Rationality is not the same as omniscience. Economics doesn't believe people don't make mistakes. You know, sometimes I feel like a nut, sometimes I don't. I might go into the store and go, man, Captain Crunch would taste really good this morning. God, I wish I had the Cocoa Puffs. Right? I make mistakes. Right? We make mistakes. Give me that pizza with pineapple on it. Oh, jeez. That was a mistake, right? So we're not saying that we're doing, but despite these fallibilities, we all respond to incentives, and we respond in unexpected ways. If you want to read a very good book on this topic, read Tim Harford's The Logical Life. This is the best book I've ever read in this sort of simple things. Logical Life, he wrote Undercover Economist. Logical Life is a lot better book. We didn't really get the supply and demand. We got the demand. I'll sneak supply and demand in a little bit later. But the basics of praxeology, again, are means, ideas, and ends. People choose. They choose according to ideas to attain ends. They make intelligible, purposeful decisions. Okay? Any questions?
We have time for 2 questions.
2? This guy right here is a tyrant. He told me 7:30 till 9, and then he cut me off at 8:30. Now I'm just having fun with you. Questions? Somebody's got to have a question because I'll keep talking because look, see that? I only got through 2 pages. What's the rest of my speech? I don't think we got enough time for that. Seriously, any questions?
What would the Austrian economics say is going to be the end result of our current economic solution or government proposal?
What would Austrian economists say would be the end result of our current government solution to the economic crisis? I'll say this, Ben will talk more about it in one way, and I'll talk some more about it in a different place, but the end result is just going to be to put off the inevitable. You can't paper over, you can't use faux resources to pretend there are real resources and long continue what you're doing. Right? If the real resources aren't there to build houses, you can't build houses. You can pretend that you're building them, but eventually when the wolf comes by and he huffs and he puffs, those houses are going down. Okay? And so the long term is unfortunately the seeds of the bust are sown in the boom, and all a bust is, a recession is a necessary cleansing of bad investments made during the boom. I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship a little bit later, and one of the things that a lot of people don't understand, and you talked about externalities and market, one of the things about that is market failures. We heard Obama say that the housing market has failed. No, it hasn't. Falling prices are not failing markets. Okay? Right? As I tell my students, you'd have to be a chucklehead if I draw supply and demand not to understand that where these two things cross matters. Right? So, if this is the market clearing price, think about a demand curve real quick as the plans of the buyers, supply curve plans of the sellers. Market clearing is when plans are coordinated. Okay? If plans change, let's say plans of buyers change. They say, we want less of that stuff. Doesn't matter why, we want less of it. So they go like this. Well, what's going to happen? Well, prices got to fall. That's not a market failure, right? That's a market working. So housing prices fall is not market failure, it's market working. Okay? Obama says it's market failure, and then lots of other people go along with it. And one of the problems we have as market guys is go back to when Reagan was president and talked about markets. He didn't understand them either, but at least he used the word without a sneer in his voice. Right? So then people think that what he talked about was really markets. And Sheldon brought up some of that stuff and talked about you run as an outsider. Nobody's an outsider. You don't get to be run for president and work your way through a political process that requires you have a comparative advantage, that is, be really good. Look, short guys don't play center in the NBA. Okay? Guys who aren't insiders, who aren't politicians, don't run for president of the United States. Guys who can't run real fast don't get Olympic gold medals in the 100. Right? The world works like that. Short, fat kids catch, right? Tall, skinny kids play basketball, right? Guys with pocket protectors go to MIT, right? The world works like that. So you don't go and run for president if that's not your comparative advantage. The comparative advantage of the president is getting elected, right? We elect officials based on their ability not to lead or to legislate, but to... What's the word I'm looking for? No. I'm going to put this in the best possible light. Their ability to campaign. Right? On their ability to campaign. And you have to be a very good campaigner to be the dude that got elected president. Seriously. You can't be bad at it and get elected. You just can't. It doesn't work. Ask Hillary. Right? Or McCain. Or Sarah Palin. Right? Or all the other people, right? Other questions? Got one more.
As a student of economics, I think economics is really intuitive and it explains a lot of the workings of society. But why is it so hard for other people to understand it? Why is it such solid boundary that builds around the discipline that makes it so hard for the ideas of economics to be understood in a more widespread way?
Okay, the question is if I get it right, economics is intuitive when it's taught by really cool guys like me, okay? So why is it that most people don't understand it? Right? Would that be a fair... Okay, one of the things that's tough is it's really not intuitive. It's not. It's counterintuitive, right? It really is counterintuitive. The cool thing is once you get it, once it's in your soul, right? Once it's deep in there, it won't come out. And once you start looking at the world through the eyes of an economist and you start looking at the world as choices and costs and benefits and incentives and rational behavior and seeing that the things that we see are the product of that, it seems like how could anybody not see it? Right? And so it becomes difficult. The other thing is we just spent an hour and a half talking about something and we got through like one day's lecture, right? Of a textbook that's that big, right? And in all seriousness, if we had another 14 of those lectures, we would know enough to go out into the world at least to begin to understand economics. In the world that we live in, it's because it's counterintuitive. For example, minimum wage, and you can read articles in the Freeman, and I would urge you to. There's a couple on the wall over there and some good ones in other places. But we would argue that, look, the minimum wage hurts the people it's intended to help. That's counterintuitive, right? It's counterintuitive to say that, you mean if I say that some people are going to earn a higher wage rate, that's going to hurt them? Yes, that's what I mean to say. Because the only way you can make their wage rate higher is by making somebody else's wage rate lower, right? And we can get to arguments that are reductio ad absurdum. Why are you being stingy and starting at $7? Why not make it $50 an hour? Right? And right away people go, $50? Whoa. I can't, no. That people wouldn't, well then why, what do you don't think $7 an hour is going to put somebody out of work? Or here's one of my favorites, and some of you probably believe this. We need to be energy independent. That's absurd. That's absurd. I don't want to be food independent. I want the farmer to grow food for me. Remember Busy Town? Right? Energy independence means here's what we want to do. We want to spend more money on things, more resources on things we're not very good at, so we can spend less on things we're really good at. So what energy independence means is not that basically what energy independence is xenophobia. Those guys with a different color skin than me, I don't like them. Right? They live over there in the desert, I don't like them. I only want to buy oil from a guy who looks like me. Nice blonde-haired, blue-eyed dude. I'll buy all the oil from him. But those dark-skinned guys with the dark hair, I ain't buying oil from them. That ain't going to happen. Okay, so you know what that's equivalent to saying is? I want to pay more for TVs. I want fewer televisions. I want less food. That's what it's equivalent to saying. But everybody says energy independence, and we go, yeah, energy independence. It's a silly idea at its root, but it's counterintuitive. He's going to tell me why it's not. Let him, and then we'll go. Go ahead.
When you're talking about energy independence, we also have to take into account things like national security and development of domestic industry.
Okay.
Those are both valid reasons for supporting energy independence.
Okay, let's dispose of the first one. The second one, that's silly. Okay? And here's why. Now here's why. I'm employing a rhetorical device that's really over the top to make a point, and then we'll come back. We'll be more serious. Comparative advantage says that you don't grow oranges in Michigan. I can grow oranges in Michigan. I can. Anybody that doesn't believe that's full of crap. You know why? Because they play football in Michigan and it's 75 degrees and it's 32 degrees outside. They just built a big place and put a roof over it, turned up the heat. So if I could build a big place and turn up the heat, anybody ever been to the Boeing plant or see the Boeing plant in Seattle? It's about as big as this town. And it's under one roof. I could grow lots of oranges in there. Yes? Would it be expensive? Okay? So what you suggest when you say that is well, what we should do then is we should support the orange industry in Seattle. Doesn't make any sense. On face, what it means is basically what we're going to do is we're going to be at loggerheads. You think it's important to buy domestic stuff. I think I would rather have a DVD player and an iPod. You would rather just have a DVD player. Okay? And at that point, we can't argue very much because the economics of it is simple. You don't have the fat kid play center field. Okay? The national security issue, when's the last time you had a fight with your grocer? You don't fight with people you trade with. You fight with people you don't trade with. Henry George, I think, is this quote's attributed to. Sheldon, you can tell me if I'm wrong, and I haven't been able to find it. I looked for it. He says, a trade embargo means you do in times of peace to your allies what you do in time of war to your enemies. You don't fight with people you trade with. If I scratch your back, you scratch mine, I give you oranges, you give me apples, I got no reason to fight with you. But if you say, I want to be orange independent, and I could slug you in the head and I don't care. Trade is peaceful. National security issues are violent. If we trade with each other, we're a lot less likely to fight. That's not to say that there aren't such things as arbitrary nation states with arbitrary national security issues. But if we traded with people, they'd be a lot less likely to fight with us. And we'd be a lot less likely to fight with them. Why is it that we live in a landmass that's bigger than Europe, with more states than Europe, yet we're peaceful? And Europe's been through 2 world wars in the last 100 years. We got dragged in, but they're 2 world wars. People marching all over each other, right? Hitting each other, killing each other, shooting each other. Why? Because they don't trade with each other. We got the Commerce Clause. Says, if you live in Nebraska, you get to trade with dudes in Kansas. It's not rocket science. But we don't like that because then the whole idea of then we don't get the xenophobia and the thus and them and all that kind of stuff. They want to stay.
If y'all want to keep chatting, please head over to the hotel. The taxis are here right now. And we'll have the social right there immediately after this.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you, guys. You and me are going to have fun. We're going to have fun. I already like you.
See where you're coming from. Article about the gift and goods. I would really like to get a link to that.
I'll see if I can find it. It's just been a long time since I've seen it. There's been a couple other things written about it. I'll look and see if I can find it.
I mean, I guess I didn't do any research on gift and goods past undergrad.
Yeah, the famous